Today, we're diving into a really fascinating question that sits right at the intersection of ancient faith and, well, modern science fiction. We're talking about the Prophet Muhammad's miraculous night journey. Was this an incredible trip across the desert, or was it actually a journey through time itself?
Okay, so let's just jump right in. This is the big question that's been floating around lately, and it's a pretty bold one. The idea is that maybe, to solve what some see as a historical puzzle, we need to rethink one of the most famous miracles in Islam. We're going to use this very question as our launchpad to really dig in and understand what the story is all about.
So, to get to the bottom of this, we're going to break it down into 5 parts. First, we'll look at where this whole time travel idea even came from. Then we'll check out what the original sources actually say. After that, we'll bust a pretty common myth, clarify what the miracle was really about, and finally, talk about the big takeaway. So you might be wondering, where did this whole time travel theory come from anyway? Well, it was basically proposed as a fix for a supposed problem, the claim that the destination, Al-Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, hadn't actually been built yet at the time of the Prophet. The thinking kind of goes like this. Okay, if the mosque wasn't physically there in the 7th century, then maybe the miracle was that the Prophet was transported forward in time to an era when it was there. Now, that would solve the historical question, for sure, but it also completely changes the nature of the event, from a journey through space to a journey through time.
But hold on, before we get lost in all this speculation, what do the foundational sources, the Quran and the authentic narrations of the Prophet, what do they actually have to say about this journey? This is where we find our best clues.
All right, first things first, let's get the terminology right. The event is called Al-Isra. And right there in its definition in Islamic tradition, it's called a physical journey. It's between 2 very specific, very real places on earth, the sacred mosque in Mecca and the farthest mosque in Jerusalem. And if you look at the Quran, it's crystal clear. The verse frames the entire event as a movement from one place, al-Masjid al-Haram, to another, al-Masjid al-Aqsa. There's absolutely no mention of traveling to a different time period. It's presented as a geographical trip.
And this was the ultimate test, right? You have to imagine, he returns to Mecca and tells people what happened. And of course, they're skeptical. I mean, a journey that took weeks, done in a single night? No way. So they challenged him. They demanded proof. Many of them had been to Jerusalem, so they started quizzing him, asking for tiny details about the building. And this is where we see a miracle inside the miracle. According to the Prophet's own account, God literally projected the image of the mosque right there in front of his eyes. So as they were firing off questions, he was just looking at it, describing every single pillar, every window, every detail as if he was standing right there all over again. Okay, so this brings us right to the heart of the time travel theory. It all hinges on this one big assumption, that Al-Masjid al-Aqsa simply didn't exist back then. But what if that assumption is wrong? The historical sources actually tell a very different story. Let's start with just one number. 40. 40 years. What's so important about 40 years? Well, it's the amount of time that passed between the founding of the 2 most sacred sites in Islam. See, according to a prophetic narration, Al-Masjid al-Aqsa was actually the 2nd house of worship ever built on earth, just 40 years after the Kaaba in Mecca. This means it has ancient foundations, way before the famous renovation done centuries later by the Prophet Suleiman, or Solomon as he's known. And this is where a really common mix-up happens. A lot of us see that iconic, beautiful golden dome and think, that's Al-Aqsa. But that's actually the Dome of the Rock. It was built much later, in 691 CE, by the Caliph Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan. The mosque itself, the actual place of prayer, sits on those much older foundations. So if the mosque did exist, and the journey was physical, then what was the miracle all about? Was it about bending time, or was it something else entirely? Well, the texts point to a concept that's just as mind-blowing. The miracle of Al-Isra wasn't about traveling through time. It was about conquering distance in time. It was about moving at a speed that just shatters any law of physics we know, covering a journey that took weeks in just a part of one night. The miracle was about speed, about instantaneous transportation, not jumping through a timeline. And believe it or not, this incredible physics-defying speed was just the first part of the trip. From Jerusalem, the 2nd stage of the journey began, Al-Mi'raj, the heavenly ascent. This wasn't a trip forward or backward in time, but upward, through entirely different dimensions of existence.
The narrations describe this ascent as a very literal, vertical journey. At the gate of each of the 7 heavens, the angel Jibril, or Gabriel, had to stop and ask for permission to enter with the prophet. At each level, he met past prophets. This whole structure reinforces the idea of moving through distinct places, not through a timeline. And the ultimate result of this cosmic journey beyond the stars was something incredibly practical, something foundational for the entire Muslim community, the establishment of the 5 daily prayers. The story goes that the original command was for 50 prayers a day, but after a famous conversation with the prophet Musa or Moses, it was reduced to 5, but with the spiritual reward of all 50.
So, after breaking all of that down, after looking at the claims and checking the sources, what's the big takeaway here? What does clarifying this amazing event really teach us?
Well, it really all boils down to this. The original texts give us a story that's clear and consistent. The journey was physical, the destination was ancient, the miracle was one of unbelievable speed. And it shows that when we're faced with modern theories or speculation, going back to those primary sources is what gives us clarity and helps us see the event as it was told and understood from the very beginning. In fact, the source material offers some pretty strong advice on this, really emphasizing how important it is to have a solid method to ground our understanding in established knowledge, instead of just running with speculation that isn't backed up. And that kind of leaves us with a final big question to think about. In our age, an age of science and speculation and sci-fi, how do we engage with these ancient stories of miracles? Do we try to reinterpret them to fit our modern ideas? Or do we try to understand them on their own incredible terms? Thanks for joining me on this one.